sequencing, what is it? And then what does it mean to share it? So what's sequencing at all? And then what does it mean to add sharing onto that? Ben, we want to take this one?
Yes. So sequencing today for a rollup is the act of determining the transactions that will actually go into the rollup. And currently most rollups today have a server that collects these transactions and orders them, gives confirmations to users that these are the transactions that are going to be included, and then ever so often it settles them on Ethereum by posting them to a smart contract. And the smart contracts today can only be updated by this sequencer. So they give in total authority to this central server to determine which transactions are going to update the rollup, with the exception of transactions that can be forced included, and there are other details we don't need to get into right now. Maybe the first thing to talk about then with sequencing is, well, what is decentralized sequencing? It's simply taking that and making it not one server that's in charge of sequencing, but many different servers. So having some kind of decentralized protocol whereby it's not just one party that can determine the transactions that get included. Maybe it's a rotating set of parties. Maybe it's a Byzantine fault-tolerant protocol. And shared sequencing is the idea that multiple rollups can share a common mechanism for determining this ordering. And I'll give one slightly zoomed out take, though, on shared sequencing that I don't think is a common way of describing it, but it's definitely the way that I think about it. I think of shared sequencing as not necessarily sharing a common party or protocol for determining the ordering, but it's more about sharing a mechanism, sharing a marketplace whereby rollups can effectively sell their block space to third parties who are bidding on the joint block space and may value it more and can create a surplus value. But rollups really can determine by the slot whether to sell that block space or not. If there is value to be had in parties jointly sequencing for multiple rollups at once, then the outcome will be that there are these third parties that will be simultaneously purchasing the block space from multiple rollups and producing these blocks simultaneously and creating a surplus value that gets redistributed to rollups. I think that last point gets a little bit deeper, and I'm going to put a pin in that because I know we're trying to go over basics 101 of what shared sequencing is, but I'll stop there.
Maybe one way to articulate the purpose or advantage of shared sequencing, and this is just my understanding, so check me on this, Ben, is that when you have one rollup, you have the economics of that one rollup, and then when you have a sequencer that is spanning multiple rollups, aka a shared sequencer, one rollup can have more opportunities for double coincidence of wants with the transactions in one rollup as it relates to another set of transactions in another rollup. And so a shared sequencer is kind of like a matchmaker between the double coincidence of wants of the economies of two rollups. And when it behooves both rollups, a shared sequencer can kind of make those connections happen. Is that like a simplified way to understand this?
Absolutely. Yeah. It enables faster bridging between rollups. There are certain things that you can't do today, like maybe it's good to, this isn't even, what you said is entirely correct, but I think just giving a few quick examples might help make it concrete. Let's say that I want to buy an NFT on one rollup, but I want to pay for it with cash on a different rollup. I might want to make these two transactions atomic without even bridging assets over, right? Could I buy an NFT on Zora with, cash that I have on ZK Sync, right? What if I want to, take advantage of arbitrage between AMMs on two different rollups? What if I want to fund a transaction on one rollup using funds that I have on the other? But let's say I want to take a loan on one rollup and use it to fund a transaction that I have on another, and then even repay the loan. So do some kind of flash loan, for example. All of these things are not possible with the status quo, and shared sequencing is not the same as being in the same execution environment like Ethereum, but it can get us under sort of certain kinds of economic guarantees very, very close to that.
Yeah, I like the marketplace analogy because it's all about creating value that otherwise couldn't have been created. So there are certain instances where we want this really low friction form of interaction, which we call synchronous composability, and that provides more value than the counterpart, which would be asynchronous composability. And it turns out that on L1, every rollup benefits from synchronous composability. So this is the luxury that we've gotten used to. And once you don't have shared sequencing, when you have this siloed sequencing, then suddenly you fall back to this lower form of composability. And I think what Ben is trying to do is kind of bubble up this value creation. And when there are opportunities to have synchronous composability, try and capture this additional value creation and potentially even give it back to the rollups. So it's a net positive for everyone. Not only are we creating value, but this value goes back to the rollups, and there's no loss from the perspective of an individual rollup.
Maybe the Ethereum layer 1, the common settlement layer for all rollups, maybe one way to perceive it is like a minimum viable composability for all rollups. At the very least, rollups are composable, albeit slowly, albeit extremely asynchronously, through the layer 1. And that is our threshold, that's our floor, that's our foundation of level of composability. And with additional levels of innovation, shared sequencing being one of them, maybe an intense is also relevant here, we can actually kind of raise the floor of what composability looks like. And maybe that's kind of like where we are in Ethereum's arc right now, is like we've got this minimum level of composability, and now the webbing between some of the rollups are starting to get fleshed out, which is like what this conversation is here. Ben, what would you like to add to this?
I'll say it like this. Ethereum is a shared sequencer, right? Ethereum, we already have a shared sequencer, right? Ethereum is a shared sequencer, not only for all applications that run on Ethereum, it is a shared sequencer for rollups. It is not as good a shared sequencer as we want right now.
It's not optimized to be a shared sequencer. Yeah.
Well, it's a shared sequencer that happens on a delay, right? And I think that it's talking about Ethereum as a shared. The difference between shared settlement layers and shared sequencers, I think, is grayer than people might think. So I think all this discussion about shared sequencing is about improving on the baseline that we have, which is that rollups share Ethereum as a settlement layer. And how can we get more out of that? How can we get atomic execution promises, right? How can we get just more value out of shared infrastructure than what we already have today?
David, I really like your point around the minimum foundation that Ethereum provides, which is this asynchronous composability. And the way, I guess a good metaphor is countries. Let's say you have two different countries. At a minimum, what you can do is transport from one country to another if you get a visa or if you show your passport. And you can also do trade, but there's some friction. You might have to pay import duties or whatever it is. And then there's something a little tighter, a little bit more close-knit, which is something like the United States or Europe, which is some sort of coalition where within those countries or within those states, you have full freedom of movement and full freedom of commerce. And in some sense, chains opting into a shared sequencer is all about maximizing this freedom of movement of assets and value, and also maximizing the freedom of commerce. And I really like the analogy that you and Ryan put forward, which is this united chains of Ethereum. We're creating a super low friction environment for the different chains to scale Ethereum with very, very little trade-offs.
Okay, so this all sounds great. Fantastic. Why don't we have this right now? Like, why it seems so simple Just like share the sequencers. Just get it done. Why can't we have it? What are some of the obstacles, Ben, that you're running into at Espresso, right? What are the net obstacles for the ecosystem as to why this is difficult? Like, why can't we have this? Why can't we have this?
Yeah, good question. So I think that in part there's a technical challenge. There's also a more social challenge, a coordination challenge. Let me touch on the technical challenge first. So the original concept of rollups was just to share Ethereum as a sequencer. Like the original idea for rollups was you don't actually have a sequencer, you just allow the smart contract to collect transactions. And so effectively the L1 proposer is basically the shared sequencer for all rollups. And just as a bit of a historical note, like this, the sequencer was introduced as something that could be used for a performance benefit. So by having the smart contract only allow itself to be updated by this one party, you can allow that party to collect many transactions. And because it knows that it's the only entity that can update this contract, it could collect many transactions at high throughput. It could compress those transactions more, so it can get more compression out of this and thus cheaper fees. It can also, if you trust it, give users very fast finality guarantees. So it can say, if you trust me, then believe me, this is the transaction. You don't need to wait for it to settle on Ethereum. This is the transaction. Just trust me, and I'll eventually post it to Ethereum. So that has all kinds of performance benefits and UX benefits. If you're going to go back to getting all rollups to share a sequencer, then you need, from a technical perspective, to preserve some of these performance benefits that we got from centralized sequencing. And so that has been, the main, technical challenge at Espresso. And even now, where we've figured out how to allow rollups to be based and to basically allow whoever is proposing the next Ethereum block to act as a shared proposer for the rollups as well. We've figured out technically how to, integrate the meat of what we have, the technical meat of what we have at Espresso, which is a very fast, high throughput consensus protocol called Hotshot, in a way that allows these rollups to enjoy much of the performance benefits that they have today, while still sort of sharing a proposer who is also the proposer of the L1. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that, but I just want to say that, look, that's the sketch of where the technical challenges come from. And then the social challenge is convincing rollups that this is a good idea, that they are going to get surplus value from not having so much fragmentation, but enabling stronger interactions with other rollups and also with the L1 itself. That coordination challenge is difficult because rollups evolved in a world where there wasn't shared sequencing, and many of these rollup projects have considered doing shared sequencing within their own ecosystems, like Optimism with the superchain, for example. But the idea of there being one Ethereum shared sequencer that expands beyond any individual rollup ecosystem is new. And even if it's somewhat where we started, it's not where we ended up, and we were trying to get back to that original state.
Yeah, so if I were to summarize, basically what you're saying is that the sequencer is this coordinator which provides various services. It can do optimal sequencing and deduplication and compression, so it's a performance benefit, but it also provides UX benefits. One of them, as you said, is this finality if you trust me, also known as pre-confirmations. And then another very useful service is MEV protection. If essentially implementing an encrypted mempool using a centralized sequencer. As a user, I send my transaction encrypted to the centralized sequencer. No one else sees it, and so I can't get sandwiched. And I guess what you're saying here is that we've made this mental unlock, which is very new recently, where we can think of the L1 proposers as providing these exact same services that centralized sequencers provide, and at the same time have all sorts of benefits. Benefit number one is we have this credibly neutral platform. Benefit number two is that we inherit a lot of the security of Ethereum. And then benefit number three is that now we can think of true global and universal shared sequencing as opposed to having ecosystem by ecosystem shared sequencing.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.